Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're looking way past the surface-level excuses to perform a clinical autopsy on why early-stage startups actually fail. Look, we've all heard that classic stat, 90% of startups fail, right? But today, we're using hard data to uncover the structural diseases that are silently killing these companies, rather than just diagnosing the final symptoms.
Let's kick things off with a number that honestly just blows my mind. $17.5 billion. That is exactly how much equity funding was burned by just 431 failed VC-backed startups in a recent dataset analyzed by CB Insights. The median company in this group raised $11 million before finally shutting down. So clearly just having a ton of cash in the bank, that definitely didn't save them.
You know, when founders shut down their companies, you almost always hear the exact same claim. We simply ran out of cash. But treating that as the actual cause of death is incredibly misleading. It's kind of like a coroner looking at a massive car crash and just writing down blunt force trauma on the report. I mean, sure, it's technically accurate, but it tells you absolutely nothing about how to avoid the crash in the first place. Running out of money is just the final symptom of an upstream structural disease.
So in this explainer, we're putting on our investor due diligence hats to build a real diagnostic checklist. We're going to run through the blunt force trauma myth, diagnose the real killers, unpack the premature scaling trap, perform an autopsy on a massive startup called Olive, highlight some major due diligence red flags, and then finish up with the psychology of failure.
All right, let's jump straight into section 1, the blunt force trauma myth, and why cash isn't the root cause.
It turns out that about 70% of founders cite cash flow as the main killer in their post-mortems. But here's the catch. That capital drying up was actually predetermined by critical mistakes made way earlier in the business life cycle. Building something nobody wants is the real reason death was coming. Running out of cash is just the mechanism that finally stopped the heart.
Moving right along to Section 2, diagnosing the real killers using the CBIT Insights taxonomy.
When you look at the breakdown of overlapping killers from the 431 company dataset, it is fascinating. 43% of these startups died from poor product-market fit. And honestly, what really surprised me here is that this isn't just a seed stage, sketch on a napkin kind of problem. This total lack of product-market fit regularly destroys Series B companies that have already raised tens of millions of dollars. Following that up, we see bad timing hitting 29%, the wrong team at 23%, and unsustainable unit economics sitting right there at 19%.
And we absolutely cannot ignore that 29% killed by bad timing. A perfect example of this is the recent alternative protein crash. You've got companies like Believer Meats, which raised $390 million, and Motif Foodworks at $344 million. They built this unbelievable massive infrastructure, but they built it for a consumer market that simply didn't move fast enough before the funding window slammed shut.
Which brings us to Section 3, the premature scaling trap, what I like to call the silent assassin.
So what exactly is premature scaling? Well, it's basically when a startup pours heavy money into things like massive marketing campaigns, tons of new headcount, or crazy complex features before they've truly validated that their core business model even works. To an untrained eye, this looks exactly like brilliant execution and rapid growth. But in reality, it is literally the absolute fastest way to set your capital on fire.
The Startup Genome dataset really highlights the massive stakes we're dealing with here. In their study of over 3,200 high-growth startups, a staggering 74% fail simply because they scaled too early. Even more shocking, 93% of those premature scalers never even managed to break the $100K a month revenue ceiling. But conversely, the founders disciplined enough to wait and scale properly end up growing 20 times faster down the line.
Let's ground all this abstract data in a brutal reality. Section 4, Case Study. The Olive Autopsy, and what $850 million couldn't save.
Olive was this massively hyped healthcare AI startup focused on automating administrative tasks. If you track their timeline, they absolutely skyrocketed during the pandemic boom, hitting an insane $4 billion valuation after raking in over $850 million. But then, October 2023 hits, and they crash and burn, completely shutting down. And crazy enough, this happened within just 2 weeks of another giant startup, Convoy, going under as the market turned. So, what actually happened here? Well, despite being heavily marketed as an autonomous AI powerhouse, Olive actually relied super heavily on manual, human intervention behind the scenes. Their own CEO, Sean Lane, admitted that their fast-paced growth and lack of focus just completely strained their resources. It's a textbook case, guys. They hit practically every failure mode: premature scaling, lack of focus, and terrible unit economics. And it proves that you can't cure those structural diseases even with nearly $1 billion. The money just delayed the inevitable.
All right, Section 5, Due Diligence Red Flags. Let's talk about how to systematically spot the walking dead.
Take a look at this number, 22 months. That is the median time from a startup's final fundraise to its official death. Furthermore, CB Insights found that 72% of these failed companies showed a measurable 15% drop in their core health metrics in the full year leading up to their shutdown. You see, failure isn't this sudden overnight explosion. The signals are there, slowly accumulating over time.
So if we look at this through an investor's diagnostic lens, here is your crucial checklist. First, demand actual evidence of product-market fit with real paying customers, not just optimistic pitch deck projections. Second, critically evaluate if the market timing window is genuinely open. Third, watch out for those premature scaling signals, like a team massively expanding headcount before their operations are validated. And fourth, treat any startup that hasn't raised since 2022 as a massive red flag. They are either genuinely self-sustaining or they're a zombie just waiting to drop.
Finally, we have Section 6, the psychology of failure, and who actually survives the trap. It turns out the failure rate isn't uniform at all. The data shows that serial successful founders boast a 30% success rate, compared to just 18% for first-timers and 20% for previously failed founders. And you know, this isn't just about pure intellect, it's about experience. Their experience allows them to recognize product-market fit signals way faster, which gives them the sheer discipline to cut losing bets early. They've seen this movie before, right? They know exactly which chapter the disaster happens in.
And as startup veteran Steve Blank points out, using the Kubler-Ross grief model, entrepreneurial failure triggers a profound emotional toll. Navigating the immense, heavy weight of shutting a company down is critical. This is exactly why seasoned founders are so incredibly effective. They've learned how to untangle their own personal ego from the cold, hard failure data, which allows them to make rational choices when the walls start closing in.
I'm going to leave you with a pretty provocative diagnostic question to apply to your own venture or really any startup you're evaluating. Is your runway actually funding your growth, or is it just delaying your reckoning? Remember, running out of cash is almost always the final symptom. It is never the root cause. I really hope this explainer equips you to spot those structural diseases before it's too late. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive.